In this video we're going to be talking over a way of possibly handling a little conundrum. Something that was brought up by Sniperism X. He's the one who had questions about the pre-made field fortifications, and he gave a little bit more detail as to why he wants to know about that. He lives in an area where there is not many major roadways and major highways and stuff, so he doesn't have to worry that much about high-speed enemy motorized or mechanized formations. But his area has large amounts of farm fields and grasslands that could be used for helicopter insertions or air assaults. So what jumped out at me for thinking of how to counter that from history, I'd thought of air observation like they did during the Battle of Britain in World War II. How the VC handled air assaults and helicopter insertions during the Vietnam War. And I suppose we could throw in there also Somalia in the early 90s, how the Somali militias dealt with the United Nations and US troops. Basically, the Black Hawk Down incident is a really good example on that stuff. So what we have here is a common setup you're going to see across most of the United States. We have isolated small patches of woods. Around it, we have farm fields and grasslands. Inside a lot of these small patches of woods, you'll have small farm sites. There'll be a few buildings. Some of them will be abandoned, like here. This one's completely enclosed. This is abandoned. These two would be active farms, or at least they were at the beginning of the conflict. So there would be road access coming in off of dirt roads. Now, currently on this map, we have here a militia base camp hidden in the woods down here. They're not occupying the old farm because it's too dilapidated. It's fallen down too much. So they determined that for OPSEC reasons and all that, they're going to stay primarily in the woods, because if the enemy would launch some type of indirect strike, artillery or mortars, they'd probably focus on the farm site. So they're going to stay in the wood lines. Now, knowing that they're very open to helicopter assault, they will post OPs, LPOPs, listening post observation posts. The main purpose of the LPOPs will be air guard, keeping watch for helicopters. They will have some form of communication with the TOC, the Tactical Operations Center, or the headquarters tent here at the base camp. It could be by radio, it could be by landline, such as a field telephone. Now, right now, for our purposes, I posted an OP up here. This OP gets a good vision on a wide open area over here, which is farm field, and this area over here, which is grassland. It's currently grown over. Both sites are firm enough that helicopters could land on them, but barring that, the helicopters can always hover a couple feet above it, and the troops can jump out the sides of the helicopter and then deploy. So we got our OP here. If we put in any pre-made field fortifications to cover these LZs, we'd probably put one in over here and one over here. This one would cover this LZ, this one would cover this LZ over here. And then potentially you have down here also. If you put one here, he could watch down here also. This base camp over here would have their own local LPOPs, so they would probably have one over here, one up here, down here, another one over here. But this is the main one for air guard for this area. They will be posted with some type of radio. It will be short range. It'll have just enough range that it can reach the talk over here in the base camp. You don't want a long distance radio for on your LPOPs, because think about it, it's not just transmitting one direction, it's transmitting 360, it's going all the way around. So you want something that's lower range for your listening posts, observation posts. They will have binoculars with them. They will keep watch. Now, if they sight helicopters traveling through the area, they will send that information into the talk. They will say where, or the general position of where the helicopters are, the direction they're going. If they can guesstimate the speed, go ahead and send that in. If the helicopters do any type of false insertions, they will also report that in where they see the choppers going down to do the insertions. Now, a very common tactic that the U.S. developed during the Vietnam War was doing multiple insertions. Let's say they would do 4 to 8. It depended on the unit and the mission. But the helicopter would come in. He would do a few stops at different LZs before he got to the one that he was actually going to do the drop at. And then at that location the troops would deploy. The helicopters would then continue on to do a few more insertions afterwards. The reason they did that was to keep the enemy guessing as to where the troops were actually deploying from. So when this air assault came in, the OP reports it. He's seen them come down in here right inside the area, but they did not leave any troops. He had eyes on to see that. He reports that he's seen them come down in the LZ over here, but he could not see if there was any troops. The LPOP that was over here reports on if they seen any getting dropped off in this location. The OP keeps eyes on the chopper. He sees them do another insertion out in this area, and during that he notices what look like troops coming out the sides of the helicopter. He reports that into the talk. The talk at that time will launch what's called a QRF, a quick reactionary force. They will move forward to possibly pre-prepared hasty positions along the edge of the wood line up here, waiting for that assault to come in. Now it's possible that these troops, instead of going this way, they could be heading in a different direction. If that's the case, they just keep watch. And then this OP will also keep watch on the helicopter and the direction that those troops go. It's possible those troops could be coming through here to clear out this farm for some reason. If that's the case, the OP reports that the troops are moving in their direction. They report it in and report that they're going to bug out. So then they bug out to their fallback position and watch what happens. Now, if the enemy does start the assault into here, because this is their target area, the quick reactionary force in here will engage the enemy at a certain prearranged distance. If there is a field fortification in this area, they will also provide fires to help split the enemy, draw them off a bit, keep them confused. While that's going on, the base camp down here would be breaking down and bugging out. And that's basically how you could go about it. Another tactic that the VC did in Vietnam was they would also put in landmines on the potential LZs. They would also put in basically something akin to anti-glider stakes that the Germans put in Normandy. You had poles sticking out of the ground. But in Vietnam, what they would do, they would attach hand grenades to the poles or land fragmentation type anti-personnel mines like bounding fragmentation type mines like the OZM series or the USM-16 series. Or they would attach mortars with some type of pull fuse. You would have these stakes spread out around the LZ. With the explosive devices attached to the stakes. Going between the stakes were ropes or twine. As the helicopter would come in, they would come in, snag the ropes on the poles. It would pull the pins on the fuses or pull the pull rings, and then those charges would start going off, surrounding that helicopter with shrapnel and anyone who's deploying from that helicopter at that time, inflicting casualties. There's a video that might give you an idea on that if you can find it. It's called Viet Cong Mines and Booby Traps. It was made in the 1960s, I think by the Marines. It's a very good video if you can get a hold of it. I have not found it on DVD. I did find it on VHS years ago, and I used to show it to my troops during booby trap training. Show them what had been done in the past, what had been encountered by U.S. troops. But this will just give you somewhat of an idea on how you can counter helicopter-borne troops that could potentially be sent after you. Now bear in mind, if they do launch, let's say the helicopter assault in here, you launch your QRF and that stuff, well, they may have also planned for some type of motorized blocking force down here. Unbeknownst to you, there could be other troops that came in on foot from a long distance, or they could be sending in a high-speed mechanized or motorized force down here that will be the blocking force, basically the hammer and anvil. This would be your anvil force down here, this would be your hammer force. These guys are concentrating on them, not even realizing that someone's deployed down in this area. They start pulling back to get away from the helicopter troops, and they end up right in a trap. I suggest everyone sit down and start wargaming this type of scenario yourself. I know I live in an area where something like this, it could be, well, is extremely likely during a conflict. And I'm sure most of us watching this video are in the same boat. So start talking through, how would you handle it? Look in history. How did the VC and the NVA handle helicopter assaults? How did they handle them in Somalia? Well, what they did in Somalia, they had their observation, which, if you watch Black Hawk Down, was usually kids, because they wouldn't draw as much attention. Those kids got on a cell phone and they called it in. And they tracked the route of the helicopters. And then along that route, they would have a little anti-aircraft surprise, like RPGs. Or they would track where the helicopters landed, and they would dispatch their quick reactionary force, which was typically vehicle-mounted heavy weapons and, you know, basically people running with light infantry weapons to counter whatever force got dropped. Now, for all my engineer brothers in the Patriot and militia movements, always remember, essayons.